Hello, one and all. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And as you may have already been able to tell just from these first few sounds of my voice, I'm sick. I just recovered from 2 days of on and off fever. I feel as if I'm on the upswing. I've now been awake for 4 or 5 hours, and I've yet to start deteriorating again as I did yesterday. But the point is that I may be, you're going to hear some coughing, which I will try to turn away from the mic to do. And I'm going to be relying more than ever on the bright, cheery disposition of my intrepid co-host, Phil.
It's me.
And he's up to the task, folks. He steps up to the plate, crack, out of the ballpark.
I feel like you're sick enough and you've tried your best to drag yourself out of bed and get into the podcast that I'm gonna meet you halfway this time.
Thank you, Phil, with your famous ebullience and just that sunny attitude that you bring all the time.
That is what people say, yeah.
So we've got an interesting lineup of fights for you here. A pretty decent looking UFC fight night. Closing out the year relatively strong. They would have closed it out very strong because UFC 282 was looking fire, but it has taken some serious hits. Still a solid card. It's fine, but it's not what it was. But here we have Kevin Holland versus Stephen Thompson, an interesting and weird welterweight main event on top of, again, a pretty solid, well-rounded undercard. We also have the rubber match between Roman Gonzalez and Juan Francisco Estrada coming up this weekend. A trilogy which has played out now over the course of 13 years, with the longest gap just being between their first fight in, I think, 2012 and their first rematch now in 2021. And they are 1-1, these two great legendary boxers, and they are going to be squaring off again this weekend. I'll say right now, just to get the hype going, that we are planning on having fan favorite Kyle McLaughlin back on the show so soon after his last appearance to discuss that one. Everyone knows he loves Roman Gonzalez more than basically anybody, and he's also going to help us break down UFC 282 or whatever remains of it. But first up, Phil, Wonderboy versus Holland is the main event, and we'll get to some of the undercard later on in the show. I think the first thing I want to start with is answer for me this question, if you can. Am I starting to hate Kevin Holland?
Or?
No, that was it.
There an or?
That was
Is that just it?
Yeah, that was the whole question.
Okay.
Tell me.
You're just a natural hipster.
I think I'm having the same thing with him that you're having with Cheeto.
Hmm. Yeah, I can understand that, yes. I'm also feeling much more annoyed with him than I used to be.
Because it's bullshit what he's doing. It's bullshit. The guy moves down, and I shouldn't be mad. He moves down to what is clearly his natural weight division. The man was never even middleweight sized. He was smaller. He frequently came in underweight. And he just starts blasting people and destroying them, and suddenly just looks like a welterweight Romero, where he can just go in there and make stupid decisions like he always has, but now he can just wreck people. Granted, some of this is the fact that he has been fighting, like old guys. Let's not forget that at welterweight, he did essentially get... Actually, no, that was at middleweight, wasn't it? The Kyle Dawkins fight?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
He's basically undefeated at welterweight, is he not?
Yeah, the Chimaev fight was up at middleweight on short notice. That one doesn't count. Even though it is the way that Kevin Holland loses most of his fights, it's irrelevant. But yeah, I am starting to resent Kevin a little bit because you don't beat Tim Means like that.
Yeah.
You don't do that to my boy Tim. just go in there and kind of just get countered and not really look like the better fighter at any point, but you just hit harder now? That sucks.
Man, you are sounding like you should be hating on Cheeto very more.
I don't know why. I still like Cheeto.
I mean, we've talked about how annoying Kevin Holland is now and that he's at welterweight.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of these sound like Cheeto things. But the thing is, I'm willing to take it from Kevin because, like, don't really think Kevin has much chance to be good.
Yeah, that's true.
He is a meme fighter, and like thus, he's going to like fight in a stupid way. I'm like, that is what I always expected.
That's true. And there's plenty of wrestlers at welterweight. I mean, God knows he's going to be humbled again very soon. So, like, you know, it's not going to carry him to the championship, this fighting style. Whereas Cheeto's very well might, inexplicable as it may seem. He's getting close.
Yep.
So, yeah, meme fighter Kevin Holland, now meme puncher Kevin Holland. What do you make of this matchup against Stephen Thompson? Another old guy for Kevin to KO, or something else?
I think it's probably the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I think I've probably said this before, but I think like Thompson really is very unfortunate in terms of the timing of his career.
Oh yeah,
because there's so many points where you just like, this guy probably just could have been champion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, he'd fought Rory. If he'd fought Rory for the belt, he'd gotten a chance to fight Lawler for the belt.
Yep.
He was incredibly close both times against Tyron Woodley and arguably won those fights. You know, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, and he's someone who sort of ended up being, in some ways, better than a lot of his contemporaries, but hasn't had the like success to actually like back it up, and now just looks. And honestly, as of that. Of his fight with Bilal, remember the name Muhammad, looks like he is finally shot. And you know, again, the other things, you know, it's just the remarkable longevity of the man.
Yeah. What is he now? 39?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lasted for a long time with a very mobile style. Presumably cutting a ton of weight, because he's still quite a big welterweight, even for modern welterweight. And yeah, like retained a level of athleticism and durability for like a very long time into his MMA career. Yeah, now he kind of looks shot to pieces. The main thing that you find yourself thinking is, you know, Kevin Holland just seems to be a physically imposing fighter at this weight class. If Stephen Thompson is no longer quick enough to get away from people using his feet, then he's just not a very good fighter.
Yeah,
like, that is essentially the crux of what makes him work, because you know he's a karate guy. He doesn't really have much defense other than that.
Right.
Who is the person that we've seen Kevin Holland who is like Stephen Thompson? And I don't think there's that many answers to that.
Yeah.
And I think probably the best answer is Jeff Neal.
And it's not a very good parallel.
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of what I find myself.
Else, Jeff Neal also got not also get soundly beaten by Wonder Boy.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I find myself thinking. I mean, yes, Thompson looked shot, but there are a couple factors there. I mean, it was the wrestling, really. In his last
He's
two,
never been, you know, like you saw that guy against Bilal, remember the name Muhammad, and you were just like, this person is going to fight Johnny Hendricks. What's going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
You could, even for a shot, Johnny Hendricks wouldn't be. He's going to completely wipe him out by whilst not getting hit. Like,
yeah, No.
It's the fact that he's getting put into positions, and once he's there, the thing. Like as I said, once his foot speed is gone, he's not a great fighter. That's just the way it is.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it was the wrestling though. I mean, I think there's still a somewhat open question how much of the, especially with the kind of horribly unprincipled striking that Kevin Holland has been demonstrating lately.
Mm-hmm.
How much he is capable of surprising Thompson. There's also the fact that was at the apex in the small cage, and this will not be. This is happening somewhere in Florida, and he's going to have lots of room to run around. But then the main thing really is that question you just asked, like, Kevin Holland, as I said at the top of the show, he gets crushed by wrestlers. I mean, he's been losing the way Thompson lost his last 2 fights his entire career. But so you because of that, you think of him as like, oh, this is the guy, the classic MMA math kind of thing. Like, this is the guy who loses to wrestlers because he's a good striker, and when people strike with him, hey, he's really good. Who's like a good outside striker that Kevin Holland has fought? And like, there really aren't any. I mean, like,
it's kind of Jeff Neal, but
yeah, that's it.
Also, that fight was just a mad slugfest.
Yeah, which Kevin Holland will almost certainly turn this into. So yeah, I mean, I side with your original inclination that like probably Kevin Holland runs Stephen Thompson around and knocks him out, but if he doesn't, Kevin has been prone to gassing throughout his career. His striking is like way more of a mess now that he's figured out he can knock people out than it used to be. I mean, well, granted, I mean, it was that messy when he fought Jeff Neal, so he's kind of just gone back to his roots for what worked for him. But given 5 rounds with lots of space to move around in, it's hard for me not to think that there's at least a significant chance that Stephen Thompson could kind of embarrass Kevin later in this fight. If he doesn't get slept.
He could embarrass him the whole way.
He really could. I mean, yeah, it still wasn't that long ago that this dude fucking styled on Jorge Masvidal and Vicente Luque. I'm a long-time Stephen Thompson defender. I don't care if his kickboxing titles are fake, which they are. The guy's a damn good MMA fighter. And he has been basically his whole career. So, yeah, and Kevin's looked like shit lately. He just looks like powerful shit. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. That's the thing, is that, how much physicality do you think Thompson has left? I mean, I think, again, he's one of the more unheralded, like, actually remarkable athletes in the welterweight division.
For sure.
In his prime was just a tremendous athlete.
The speed with which he picked up wrestling defense. I mean, that just the rate at which he learned new skills was astounding.
But even then, like, his durability doesn't seem that badly gone.
No.
I mean, again, he also clearly had like an absolutely rock solid chin. Luque caught him with a ton of hooks when he was trying to like scuttle away off the fence, and he just kind of ate them. Just outpunched Luque when they were back in the center of the cage. Yeah, he's still. Like, that's the thing. You just don't know how Kevin Holland is going to react against someone who can like punch as straight, or in fact now straighter than him, and is just super accurate. Like, Kevin Holland going to keep walking through those punches, or is he going to like get stung, back off, and then sort of pretend that like didn't hurt, and then just go back to neutral and have exactly the same thing happen again?
Kevin's durable as hell too.
What's that?
Kevin's durable as hell too. He's never been knocked out. He can take a huge shot, but it's a question of how comfortable is he just walking through fire like that. And I do think, like,
the difference between, say, Means and Thompson as a straight counterpuncher is that Means will always take the fight that you want to have with him, really.
Mm-hmm.
Punish, he'll take chunks off you on the way in. Once you're in a pocket exchange with him, he will just exchange with you. And once you want to wrestle with him, he will just wrestle with you. But Thompson will simply hit you and disengage.
Yeah.
So, just wading through fire and getting to him, I think, was much more likely to work against Means than it is against Thompson.
Yeah. In a way, it has always worked against Tim Means. Even if it hasn't always won fights against him, it has led to very competitive, difficult fights. Yeah, I don't know. And there are still these little glimpses, even in that fight with Muhammad, where it's like the real problem here. It's not even Stephen Thompson doesn't look like he can't pull the trigger. He's still out there trying to nail Bilal on the way in. He's still trying to trade with him and then escape. It doesn't look like he's like overcautious or anything. It's just that like the moment he has to like calculate both the wrestling risk and the striking risks, he just can't cope with both anymore. Like it's just this slight delay in reaction time. And I do think that if this is confined to the striking, like the man has been striking forever. There's just going to be less of a meaningful delay there if he's not being threatened with with a test of his secondary skill set. Because that stuff is just instinctual. It's less about reaction time and more about just built-in muscle memory. But I don't know, man. Am I just going to sadness hedge? Is it insane that I would possibly think of picking Kevin Holland as a sadness hedge? I like Stephen Thompson. I don't want to see him get knocked out by the dumbest version of Kevin. I don't want that to happen.
You brought this into being.
Damn it.
Anna.
Is this the real thing? Is this when I was gloating?
Yep. This is the final turn at which your own proclivities end up being what destroy you.
God damn it. When I was gloating about how all my little favorite weirdos turn out to be really good fighters, the truth is that all my favorite little weirdos just turn out to be disgusting punchers who cheat their way to victory.
Yes. All you've been doing this whole time was picking athletes.
God damn it.
Man, I love how this guy's crafty game, which is somehow enabled by his incredible immortality.
I don't know, man.
I think am I tempted to? Am I going to pick Stephen Thompson?
I'm very tempted to pick him, but I feel like it's so much me projecting. It's projecting the idea that technique is ultimately what wins fights, and while of course technique is incredibly important, there does come a point where age and athleticism are the defining factors. They override technique, and I don't know, man.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I expect Kevin to lose a lot of stand-up exchanges.
He looks like shit lately, man. He really does. I'm going to pick Stephen Thompson. I mean, fuck it. Who cares?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think the reason I'm probably still going to pick Kevin with a lot of trepidation is just that, whilst I don't expect him to once Muhammad was able to close down Thompson in a way which I didn't think was really possible for him.
Right, yeah. That's
He's
very
small
bad sign.
And Thompson's big. And whilst I do expect Holland to close Thompson down and wing big punches at him and for them probably to miss, I think where I expect differences to be made is when Holland just grabs single collar ties and stuff off the cage. I think that's where because he's still quite a good clinch fighter, or at least a violent one. And he's not trying to wrestle with people. I think he can probably just build exchanges off that, and as Stephen Thompson tries to get away, he still does so, with his hands down, running away from the fence. I think if it's going to be like ugly exchanges of Holland pushing him back into the cage and probably getting hit, and then Holland managing to like just grab hold of him briefly and punch him.
Yeah.
But, like, the durability factor, I mean, I think obviously Thompson's still actually pretty tough. Very much not as tough as he was, and Holland is still a freakish, a freakish immortal.
Yep.
He's just 39, man.
Yep.
He's almost 40 years old. Like, fighting like that.
A style which is very dependent on youthful traits. Very dependent on agility and reaction time and speed.
Yeah, and just Holland has just cheated his way to victory before.
Yeah. I mean, I do think Thompson's style is way more principled than it might appear. Like, it's not just this is a style that only works for young men, because, again, clearly there is a level of technical proficiency he has that is way above what Kevin has been demonstrating lately. Much better positioning, much better understanding of angles, better combination, better form on his punches. Like everything is pretty airtight, but it's still it's not the most well designed to weather single errors when single errors become potentially catastrophic. Like there's somebody's going to hit you with your hands down and you're hopping around. They're going to time you, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. Yeah. You think?
I find myself going back to Jacare Holland, which was a much worse matchup for Kevin.
Yeah.
Then it happened, and you're just like, oh, I see. Jacare is old as shit.
Yeah. God, that was so stupid. I'd forgotten that fight.
Hmm. That's the thing. He can just cheat his way out of things.
How did he beat Jacare?
Breakdancing.
That's so stupid. Yeah, that's probably right. Whatever. I refuse to sadness hedge. I refuse to even admit that picking Kevin Holland would be a sadness hedge. I'm going to pretend I still like Kevin. And but I have long respected and admired Stephen Thompson, and I'm going to optimistically pick him. And what I think would undoubtedly be in his youth, or even just like 4 years ago, be a style matchup where I would pick him right away. Wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. This is wholly an age thing.
Yeah.
Hey.
Well, I refuse to let go just yet. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Chocolatito Estrada 3, and probably talk a little bit about their series and their respective fights with Srisaket Sorungvasai. And after that, more from the Wonder Boy versus Holland undercard, which includes Brian Barberena versus Rafael dos Anjos, Matthews Nicolau versus Matt Schnell, Tai Tuivasa versus Sergey Pavlovich, Jack Hermanson versus Roman Dolidze, Angela Hill versus Emily Ducote. I mean, there's a lot of interesting fights on this undercard. And we will probably end up cranking out a small bonus episode out of it if we discuss, even just more than two of those. So all of that and more, some of it ending up on the Patreon after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about El Boxeo, Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito versus Juan Francisco Estrada 3. The climactic rubber match bout between these two great fighters, one of which I think inarguably is the greater, and very definitely one of the greatest boxers of all time. Roman Gonzalez, first faced Juan Francisco Estrada, I should have double-checked this date. I'm pretty damn sure it was back in 2012. And
I believe it was. So basically, I believe it was also in November. So we're pretty much coming up on the 10-year anniversary.
Wow. And it was a thrilling fight. I mean, the thing is with these two guys, it didn't even particularly stand out as like in terms of excitement because they don't really have bad fights. Roman Gonzalez is an absolutely relentless, just sort of inherently aggressive fighter who gets more aggressive and more confident the longer a fight goes on. He is also a brilliant defensive fighter who just forces his way into the pocket. He seems to be standing right in front of his opponent at all times. And even in fights where you feel like there's a lot of 50-50 exchanges, you then go back and watch them and you're like, oh, he's barely getting hit clean at all. He's rolling with the shots. He's moving his head beautifully. He's got this really nice, like simple but subtle high guard that just takes most of the sting off of most shots that come at him. And he's an excellent aggressive counterpuncher. So this leads to exciting fights. Juan Francisco Estrada, much more of a sort of boxer, bit of a boxer puncher. Less powerful than Roman, less aggressive, more reliant on footwork and his jab, but also has what most people will consider a classic Mexican fighter thing, which is that when opponents do what they usually do to outfighters, they try to run him over, he will bite down and swing with them, and is himself inherently aggressive and will, using that excellent jab of his, sort of wiggle his way into exchanges down the stretch of a fight and start setting up and landing more and more impactful blows. Again, less of a puncher than Roman, but sharp and accurate and super, super tough. Insanely durable as well. So these guys were just, the fact that they had an exciting fight with these two styles wasn't really a miracle. What was a miracle is that it was super competitive, and it seemed more miraculous the more time that went by, because Roman Gonzalez announced himself as just like the best dude on earth, and everyone wanted to see this rematch. And then they rematched, unfortunately, well after Gonzalez seemed to have reached and passed the end of his prime, and that's where we pick up the story basically. Phil, what do you make of the sort of the trajectory of these two guys' careers, and what can we project on this third fight of theirs just a year after their second bout?
I mean, yeah, because this is one of those ones where the eulogies were written for Chocolatito after he lost to Srisaket Sorungvisai in their second fight. The first one, I think, was, a competitive but sort of relatively clear loss. Sort of marred by some fouls, but but one which I don't think many people expected him to lose, apart from a few, giant haters, who probably hate Gonzalez. But
anyone in particular?
The rematch where he got knocked out, everyone was like, "This is the end," and people basically wrote eulogy pieces looking back on his career and saying how fantastic it was.
Right.
Then he went on to pick up some genuinely really good wins.
Yeah.
Made his way back to that Estrada fight. I think the interesting thing is that kind of looking back at that second Estrada. Looking back at the second Estrada fight, which was just a absolute nail biter of a fight, just full of action. I think it's a fight that both of us actually have scored for Chocolatito, but it's still super close. But I think one of the dynamics going into that fight is the fact that Estrada also looked like he was slowing down going into that fight. Which is odd, because he's a good deal younger than Chocolatito, and he was very young in their first fight. Mm-hmm. But his fight against, I think it was Carlos Cuadras before he fought Gonzalez again. Yeah, he didn't look amazing.
Correct.
And Gonzalez had already been in the middle of this kind of little resurgence, and I think there was reason to kind of hope. And if you were a Gonzalez fan, and as it turned out, I think those hopes were kind of validated. As I said, I think he probably won that matchup in the second fight. It's a tremendous matchup, and it got me thinking about how infrequently we get to see these kind of matchups at the kind of how many kind of great matchups that we think of, like Leonard against Hagler or whatever, essentially came towards the tail end of fighters' careers.
Right.
Where the chances of us seeing a second one the chances of it being run back again seem so much more unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the things we were talking about before this fight is I was trying to figure out how did Estrada beat Sorong Versailles, and I mean, admittedly, he'd already lost to him, but how did he beat him when Gonzalez couldn't? If we think of these guys as both being slightly physically declined, and we think of Gonzalez as the greater fighter of the two, why did Gonzalez lose to Rungvisai, whereas Estrada was able to beat him? And I think, to me, it's a few. I think it's primarily the fact that Estrada is a slightly more tactically flexible fighter than Gonzalez is. Gonzalez has incredible footwork and punch placement and control of rhythm and technical counterpunching and so on, but his game plan is always essentially the same.
Yeah.
It is to make you start thinking about what his punches are going to be.
He's got to tear you apart.
Yes.
He's got to make you... Yeah.
It is to make you fear his punches. And coming forward in that against Rungvisai, he was able to... this just put him in essentially a slugfest with someone who just stood his ground, someone who was bigger and equally powerful,
mm-hmm.
just willing to kind of punch with him. Estrada fight with Rungvisai is much more notable for the way that, like, Estrada gets punches off and then simply steps back away, and Rungvisai is like left punching at air.
Yeah. There's also the fact that it bears mentioning that Sorong Vasai made I recall commenting at the time, a strange tactical decision in that fight to fight it mostly righty. When he is a switch hitter, but I think he's best as a southpaw. But yeah, I think you're totally right. Like, just the game plan of Estrada there to contest this fight from a longer range, to poke and peck at Sorong Vasai. He's a tremendously flexible fighter. That's really why I love him. Like your classic boxer puncher, that he's this great technician who can nonetheless kind of do everything. Who can fight really mean if he needs to, who can swing back if he needs to scare somebody off, but is also perfectly content to just sort of pick somebody apart from the outside if that's the way he's going to win. And he made Sorong Vasai look clumsy.
And that to me is kind of the story of their of all of the fights between them. It's the sort of costs of stepping backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because Gonzalez simply won't do it.
Right.
Thus went toe to toe with Rungvisai. But in the fights between Estrada and Gonzalez, for Estrada to really step back was often it wasn't suicide, but it was a bad idea. Because this wasn't going to be Sorong Vasai, who was like a planted, sort of a much more planted puncher. It was going to be someone with remarkable offensive footwork and a low base and very long arms and huge power, who would simply step after him and start doing things like yes, making tiny little steps to disguise what angle he was coming from, just like throwing his right to the body and then his right to the jaw, and it wasn't something that stepping backwards for Estrada, I think, in these fights has always been incredibly dangerous. I think that is in some ways why they have had. I think their last fight, which is their most recent fight, which I think is probably the better of the two, is I think you can see difference between the learned and the instinctual, and how they are in that fight. In some ways, the same thing for Estrada, because he starts off the fight and he's trying to pressure Gonzalez as much as possible. He's trying to put him on his back foot, trying to land jabs and keep Gonzalez's guard closed, and it's working like most of a round, and then he starts getting countered. From then on, he starts trying to be more of a back foot outfighter, and this is, I think, something that he probably didn't want to do, but he's just naturally doing it. But then, as the fight goes deeper, he realizes that the best thing he should actually be doing is simply never taking a back foot, and it devolves into this, or it evolves, if you like, into this just incredible toe-to-toe war.
Yeah. That I'm just going to have to rely on my durability, and the fact that I can actually trade punches with Roman is just, maybe it's not as fun. It doesn't feel great. He's hitting me clean. But yeah, he actually gets to a point where he is actually testing some of the things that Gonzalez may have lost with age.
And he's got advantages in the pocket with Gonzalez. I mean, he might not have the power, but he is bigger. And in that second fight, he's fighting at his weight class.
Yeah,
I think he is a sharper puncher. He is able to throw more in combination than Gonzalez can. It's just a question of, can he overwhelm Gonzalez's defenses enough to make him step back,
right, and
without getting punished in return? And the answer to that is sometimes. It was enough for him to win the decision, but again, I'm not sure if I would have given it to him, but it's a tremendously gutsy performance.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing with this matchup is it's kind of, I mean, we talk about this in regards to MMA matchups all the time. It is sort of a story of depth versus breadth. That Estrada, I think flexible is an excellent word. He's a very flexible fighter. And he can sort of, this is why he can beat certain guys that Roman simply can't. He's capable of taking a wide variety of different approaches to his opponents. But if he
ironically, in some ways, I think he is more suited to being a weight class jumper.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because he doesn't rely on his ability to hurt people, to scare people with his shots. He can. I mean, yeah, he's got a ton of different ways to befuddle his opponents, to outmaneuver them. Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to a fight with Roman, each time I've watched that rematch, I become more and more convinced that Gonzalez won, because I think you're just looking at an example of the extreme depth of somebody who is just a little more committed. Their stylistic commitment is narrower. There are so many subtleties to the way that Roman Gonzalez pressures people. I absolutely love the way that he uses his defense as an offensive weapon, and that he uses the fact that his defense is there to put himself in these potent positions where, again, there is this constant feeling that he's on prey when he's standing in front of his opponents. But each time you take a swing at him, each time Estrada tries to hit him with a shot, you get a subtle little block. The block usually comes with a little bit of footwork, usually these small, subtle steps that then immediately comes back with usually not just one but two punches. You have this extremely deep sort of flow of like target selection. Roman Gonzalez is a great body puncher, but he's also really great at mixing up because in this like swaying back and forth, the head movement, the moving of the guard, there is always this temptation to use that defense in the most obvious way, to fire the loaded up punch. When you slip to the left, your left hook becomes loaded. Now you want to fire it. Gonzalez is super good at picking and choosing his spots to throw the loaded punch or to just throw a soft bullshit punch that's not loaded up, just to, again, as you said, like forcing the opponent to just have to contend with the constant threat of being hit, even if they're not his most powerful punches. And so throwing from these unorthodox positions, throwing the hand that you don't expect, and always being ready to move into any of those options off of sound defense. Like, this is the kind of depth that, I think still being the somewhat younger man, Estrada can at now cope with better than he did in their first fight, which I think he proved. But I think it is only a fact of age, really, that that even made that possible. Like, I think if maybe if Estrada had taken this exact approach in their first fight, maybe he would have gotten knocked out. I mean, I don't know. He's, again, an incredibly durable fighter. Has he ever been KO'd? I don't think he has.
I don't think so. No.
No, I don't think he has. Yeah, he's always been insanely durable.
And he was, maybe he felt like he could take the punches less down at, forget what weight class it was.
I also just think he was a younger man, and Gonzalez was able to put a little bit more of a scare into him back then. Now he feels like the bigger man. He reaches a point in the second fight where he realizes he can trade shots, that Gonzalez can't take the shots as well as he used to. But, I think if they were younger, then Gonzalez.
I think he also just realizes it's that's the thing. That's why it's like a fascinating kind of mental story for him, because I think it's also, he's just like, I have to win. You know, I cannot outslick this guy. It's impossible.
Right.
And there's a big turning point where he's been. It's not a big turning point, but I can't remember where it is. Like around the third round or something, where he's been building all his offense off double jabs and so on, and he just throws like one massive right hand just to start the exchange, and it shocks Gonzalez about as much as it shocks the commentators.
Yeah, I think he drops like the first 4 rounds of the fight because he's trying to out-slick Roman, and Roman's just nailing him with harder punches and just constantly moving in on him. It's the moment when he just digs in and throws at him that he actually finds some success. The remarkable thing about Gonzalez, though, is, I mean, this is a man who's past his prime. The clear sign of a truly all-time great fighter is that he is still turning in great performances past his prime. Like really great, legendary, memorable performances. But the really remarkable thing is that, excuse me, even in the 12th round of their second fight, as the older fighter, the more shop-worn fighter, he's still doing what Chocolatito has done in the 12th round of basically every 12-round fight he's ever had, which is he just goes into 5th gear of insane sicko mode pressuring, and Estrada meets him full on. It's just like there are sequences in that 12th round where I swear to God, 20 punches are thrown in a row on both sides. Like neither man stops punching. They're both just trying to outlast each other in these endless exchanges. But I think Gonzalez gets the better of it. I mean, he makes his mark. He just proves you want to meet me in the middle. You want to throw down with me. This is the kind of fight that I've spent my entire career winning. So I really don't know. I mean, we've mostly just talked about their history. I don't know what to project onto the third fight.
So I'm going to take one comment for contention.
Yeah.
And that is, said Chocolatito is the more faded fighter. Is this true?
Okay, yeah.
Because so Estrada is several years younger than Chocolatito.
He's 3 years younger, I believe. Possibly, 3 and change.
But I think that is one of the keys to this fight. I think is that all that Chocolatito, had the end of his career where everyone was just like, that's it, it's done, it was great, we loved it, all time great. Then he came back, and then Estrada was, beating the people that he couldn't, namely Gonzalez, which made him a 2-1 favorite in their rematch. You could really argue that Estrada was starting to show cracks in his speed and his speed and his basically that's it. Even before he fought Chocolatito in their second fight, and I think it has only increased in the time since, because he did not look particularly good, and he fought. Who was the last guy he fought? He had one fight since then, right? Argy Cortez.
Right.
It was meant to be, a bit of a layup fight before he could, they would presumably try and book a rubber match between him and Chocolatito. But he just kind of struggled, and he genuinely didn't look very good. And was unable to, convert a late knockdown into a landslide winning performance. He wasn't able to particularly build on momentum. And this kind of thing happens a lot in combat sports as well. That mentioned this classic example of Roberto Duran, who fought someone when he was 40 years old, and then fought them again when he was 10 years later, and they were shot because they were by this point more shot than Duran was, because Duran was a giant freak. That is the other thing about being an all-time great, is that they tend to be just utter physical freaks. Lots of Yoel Romero's career in MMA, you're like, who is closer to a physical prime at this point? Is it Chris Weidman? Is it Lyoto Machida? Or is it you, the much older man? Yoel Romero.
Right.
And I find myself wondering, the fight can be looked at from the perspective of Chocolatito coming back as as a sort of one last hurrah of a great, really taking it to his biggest rival. It can also be looked at as the just pure physical difference between someone who is a very good athlete and technician and sort of physical specimen and just an all-time great. And I think if you look at the two, I think there's more to be said. Well, two things. Estrada's style is, I think, a little more as it requires flexibility. I think it requires a little more in terms of his physicality to make it work. We talked about Stephen Thompson, and when his foot speed goes, Estrada needs to be quick on his feet. He needs to be able to throw in combination. I think many of Chocolatito's gifts are those which tend to fade later, like timing and just pure power.
Yeah, and again, having dug his way into this narrower channel, there's just a lot more embedded feel for the kinds of reactions and the kinds of sequences he needs to put together. Than having to figure out a sort of different approach for everyone every time. Which that's a good point.
So from my perspective, I think it's not a super difficult pick for me. Obviously, if Chocolatito suddenly falls off, I won't be surprised, because that's also the way that these things often work, is that people have a tremendous rally and then suddenly just collapse. think the narrative of the way these guys have fought is sort of relatively well established in that Gonzalez simply has a bit of an edge over him, regardless of what the judges said in the second fight, which was, again, incredibly close.
Yeah, as their first
anyone
fight,
scoring it to Estrada.
Even as their first fight was super competitive. I mean, these guys are made to deliver close, thrilling, fun fights. But yeah, each time I've watched them, I also come to the conclusion that that Gonzalez just slightly, not in the way this phrase is usually used, but he just slightly has Estrada's number. That he can Estrada doesn't have the power to back him off. And he can just funnel Estrada into his fight more effectively than Estrada can. Because Estrada's fail-safe option against guys who want to pressure him is to scare the shit out of them and show that he's down to fight with them. And Gonzalez doesn't care. He likes it. So... yeah, and I'll say right now, like, I already think Gonzalez has proven that he is like a Duran. Like, is he going to have more surprising losses? Yeah. But I don't think he will fall off like that. I just think little cracks are going to start to slow, but he has already been fighting an unbelievably long time for a dude at this weight class. Like, little guys aren't supposed to have careers this long. And I thought he still, frankly, looked phenomenal in their second fight. As impressed as I was and always am with Estrada, I thought Gonzalez, it looked like their first fight. Like, the style matchup, I think, just slightly but concretely favors him.
And that's the thing. I think the style matchup slightly favors him, and honestly think there is a good chance that Estrada is, despite being younger, is the more physically declined fighter at this point.
Yeah, you may be right. That weirdly his style is more taxing, which is so crazy because Gonzalez seems like a dude who should be just like soaking up damage his whole career. But also he really hasn't. Again, like for a dude who's that aggressive, he's insanely hard to hit. Certainly to hit with clean, impactful punches. So yeah, I'm also going to take Gonzalez. I'm very excited to watch it. I mean, it's an incredible series these guys have already put on together, and the fact that it took so long between their first fight and their second fight, I think we're very lucky to have the third fight again so soon. And hopefully before either guy has quite left his performing years behind him.
I mean, I don't think there's no chance of it being boring. That's the only thing you can say.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, it might be one of them has shockingly declined and gets finished. Might have shockingly both declined, but even so, if they have, it's still going to be a tremendous fight. Yeah,
they were made to bring the best out of each other. Very much looking forward also to having Kyle on next week. Earlier, Phil, you were talking about, you were making, I thought, this very insightful sort of comparison between these two guys and Sorung Vasai, and you're doing like a whole Ali, Frazier, Foreman kind of thing. And obviously there's some differences there. Like in this case, if Roman Gonzalez is Joe Frazier, then Frazier was not clearly the best of those three. But I'm glad that you didn't bring it up, because I want you to bring it up next week when Kyle is here, because I'm sure he's going to love it.
Yeah, that'll really, really upset him.
He really loves like surface level.
Yeah, just comparisons of the most famous boxers.
Yeah.
Of all time. In some ways, he's like Floyd Mayweather, isn't he? Who would you say is the Anthony Joshua in this matchup? It's going to be great.
I love when you talk boxing with Kyle. You know exactly how to get under his skin. So that'll be fun. Yeah, make sure you watch this. Frankly, folks, watch if you can, watch this instead of the Thompson Holland card. It's a good fight night card, but this is like the conclusion of a really epic series between two great fighters, one of whom, like, you're witnessing the twilight years of one of the best boxers we've ever seen. So this is going to be a great fight. And even if it isn't great, it's important. You know, it's momentous. It's a big deal. Two little guys, but a big fight. All right, let's take one more break. When we come back, the rest of the undercard. I already named what those fights were. I forget now. I'm not looking at the Wikipedia page. We'll be right back after this to talk about Barberena RDA. That's one of them. Any others after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about the Thompson-Holland undercard here. And first up, the co-main event. By the way, Phil, did you see that next week's co-main event now features Paddy Pimblett?
Wow.
It's happening.
Wow, pay-per-views.
The co-main event of Thompson versus Holland is Brian Barberena versus Rafael dos Anjos, RDA. And I don't know, man. I don't know about this one.
I mean, this is just the same thing as in a completely stylistically different way. This is the same thing as the main event, right? Just that the only exception being that, again, even then, it's not the exception. Is really like, basically the younger guy is also like bigger. At least, naturally fits in the weight, can naturally fit in the weight class above.
Yeah.
Whereas the older guy. But other than that, you're just like, what reason would there possibly be to pick Brian Barberena with any kind of size or physicality parity over RDA?
Well, yeah, even as the younger guy, I mean, accepting that, I mean, I guess, frankly, impressive performance against Robbie Lawler, but, like, he himself has looked like ass his last several fights. And Robbie Lawler was another old guy. I don't think RDA has looked like RDA has clung on to his prime better than Robbie Lawler.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe that's not even fair to say because Robbie Lawler's like championship run really realistically was post prime, but yeah, like other than that fight with Lawler, Barberena has looked slow on the trigger. He's looked more fragile. I mean, he just had a series of absolutely heinous wars, one after the other. And then there was that fight with Jason Witt right in the middle of this recent run where he was just getting like staggered all over the shop by Jason Witt. Like a guy with no striking to speak of. Granted, like a solid athlete. But just a really clumsy, awkward striker who's not even like fast or coordinated. And he was just nailing Barberena and hurting him over and over and over. And I don't know, man. The combination of RDA's wrestling with RDA's, as far as I can tell, still very credible striking chops. Like, how do you pick Barberena here? Can he possibly drown RDA the way he did Robbie Lawler when RDA can probably just like take him down if he needs to?
I mean, this is another one of those ones where like, is the older guy actually more physically declined?
Yeah, I don't think he is. I really don't.
I mean, or even if he is declined, is he coming down there from a lower baseline? I mean, admittedly, this is exactly what we said about Robbie Lawler and Brian Barberena.
Sure, yeah.
And then Brian was like, oh no, actually he is. So I think the basic thing is like, there's a real dumb dynamic here, which is just that RDA's never been that difficult to hit, and Barberena actually hits pretty hard. Like, it hits really hard, I think, like in a very underrated way. I think there's a much more of a chance than there normally would be. Barberena is just going to absolutely clock him. He will somehow bookend RDA's career with the Jeremy Stevens fights at two different weight classes. More than possible. But also, like, Barberena, with the exception of that Lawler fight, again, which, maybe he will try and replicate that. can be trapped at range and dictated to. I think both the Luque and Brown fights indicate how much he struggles if people aren't just going to concede to a boxing match with him.
Right, exactly.
It's not just the striking with RDA, it's the low kicks.
Yep. And the wrestling. It's the fact that Robbie Lawler, I mean, he didn't even really jab his way in. Mm-hmm. Like, he really just wanted to walk into the pocket and, like, outclock Barberena's combinations. Pick off his shots and come back with counters. And he had some success. I mean, even then, I think our point about the gulf between these guys in terms of physicality was still not completely closed by age. Even then, Robbie Lawler was able to find some success and block shots and land some crushing counters. But he spent the entire fight literally just walking into Barberena's range. When having just had a frankly surprisingly competitive, like, late career rematch with Nick Diaz, this is just like a better, stronger, harder hitting Diaz.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the main thing was that, like, that fight, it just quickly transpired that, like, Barberena could hurt Lawler, and Lawler couldn't hurt him. And Lawler has no real way of, like, preserving himself in a fight.
Right, exactly. Yeah, his defense has to be perfect, and again, he wasn't even, like, jabbing or kicking. It was classic Robbie Lawler, like, everything in mid-range, if not closer. And yeah, RDA can land jabs and kicks from really far away, even though he's the shorter man. And then otherwise, like, he might just hit a double, push Barberena back to the fence and just take him off his feet. I think
because a lot of the directionality of the Barberena Lawler fight was Barberena, like, hitting off the cage.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then just throwing a million punches, which Lawler would, like, concede to walk into. RDA ain't going to do that. RDA is one of the very worst people to be backed up against the cage against.
Yes.
And more so than Robbie Lawler is like, when he sees someone in that position, he's like, I'm going to work my way inside and I'm going to land the biggest punch of my life. And then, he worked his way inside and then he landed the big punch. And it's like, oh, it doesn't seem to really have the effect it used to. But RDA will simply, like, kick people's legs and take them down when they do that kind of stuff, as well as punching them in the face.
Yeah.
He's not going to try and navigate space in the same way.
No, it lights up the part of RDA's brain that, like, that a dog gets when they see, like, a rabbit running away.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, yes, now it's time to build, to put everything together, go hunt, kill. Yeah, I just excuse me, I have a hard time seeing Barberena letting himself get backed up to the cage and still beating RDA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I admittedly, I was kind of shocked to see him beat Lawler.
Sure.
Beat less so in the moment, but again, this is another one where I'm just like, if you win this fight, it's because the other guy got old overnight. Right. And as much as that was like a great, genuinely smart performance against Lawler, doing exactly the right things, it was also a fight where I was like, Lawler genuinely wouldn't have lost this in his prime. This wouldn't have happened.
I stopped recording. I should have kept it going. I saw the little circle was lit up around your thing, so you're just talking to yourself this whole time. Sorry. I didn't want... I'm okay having to turn away and cough every now and then, but when you're trying to talk and it's just me hacking up a fucking lung over here.
Sorry.
I can't help it, all right? I'm dying.
I'm in contact with Carl.
Usurpers.
That's the right tone for that. Yeah.
Right? Usurpers. Yeah. My vile viceroy and his chancellor have come to
surely would be like your would be like your long lost but much hated relative has an illegitimate claim to the throne.
Yeah.
Been working together. Okay, so do we know what the last thing that was said was?
I can go back and find out. One sec.
Yes, that would be helpful. That's just a fight where you look at it and you say, RDA would definitely win this in his prime as well. And also, RDA has a way of making it safe.
Yeah.
So, I think Barberena wins because he just has to club RDA, basically. He either has to knock him out or he has to hurt him badly and somehow keep him on the back foot. But I just don't think that he's really built to do that.
Yeah.
People have only really kept RDA on the back foot with wrestling, really. And, I just don't think, even with a potential size advantage, that he can do that. So, yeah, he's going to get pushed up against the cage, and RDA isn't going to be able to finish him or anything. He's just going to win, another really clear Moicano Felderes decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will say this about Barberena, like all MMA lab fighters, he's actually a pretty stout defensive grappler. He does get taken down, but he's usually pretty difficult to control for long periods of time. He will work his way back to his feet really aggressively, and maybe he can. I mean, if he comes in here with the right game plan, if I'm Barberena's team, I'm definitely saying we have to get on RDA and pressure him, use our size. Because, it's mostly wrestlers who have pressured him, but it's also I don't know, Tony Ferguson.
Yeah.
The other big dudes have just decided to sort of be imposing, just stand their ground and use reach and just back RDA up. And we know he's always been or for a long time anyway, has been too willing for his own good to kind of rely on the fact that he is actually a decent enough boxer off the back foot to think that he can win fights from there when he really can't. So if I'm Barberena's team, that's what I'm having him do. But the other fact is, as we said at the top, Barberena's also shot. He's more shot than RDA. So even if he does that, I just don't know, man. And I don't know that getting taken down and working your way back up 8 times against Jason Witt is a very good sign against RDA. I think far worse things might happen to you on the ground against Dos Anjos. So, okay. Let's move on down the main card then. Next up, a quick hit here. We have Matthews Nicolau is taking on Matt Schnell.
It's Matt Schnell against a big counterpuncher.
Yeah. I don't think this one takes an awful lot of thought to sort of figure out the dynamic. Nicolau's really good, man. I have always liked him. Really sharp counterpuncher, solid wrestler when he needs to be, solid kicker when he needs to be. But it really is the counterpunching that butters his bread. And Matt Schnell is a crazier version of Matt Schnell, an increasingly crazy version, but he's still Matt Schnell. So the question is this the return of Matt Schnell getting KO'd?
That is the interesting question, right? Because
it hasn't happened in a while.
Yeah, I mean, Nicolau, he's a guy who the sort of Aston style type guy who generally hurts people but doesn't put them away. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's the sort of more technical, less physical version of Pantoja, essentially. So, I mean, it could actually be genuinely competitive, but also I'm not picking Schnell against counter-puncher with power who isn't just going to himself put into an absolute hole like what's his face, like Tyson Nam did.
Right. Yeah, he stays busy enough to win. He wins rounds as well.
He's much more of an aggressive counterpuncher than Tyson Nam. He's just eventually I'm going to land a giant bomb.
Yeah.
Probably. So yeah, got to pick Nicolau, but I think it might be by decision. But it should be awesome.
Yeah, I think it'll be very fun. I think a decision is the most likely. You're totally right that Nicolau, I think Sun Tzu is a great comparison. He's one of these fighters who, he's technical, his timing is excellent, he picks up on patterns superbly well, and so he's one of these fighters who seems to almost accidentally hurt people at least once per fight. Like without putting a ton of steam on his shots, just throwing the right punches at the right times. Usually that left hook. But he's not a finisher. Matt Schnell has not been getting KO'd lately. I mean, he recovers better from getting hurt when it happens. And I think he's also just way more aware of the shots that are coming in to hurt him before they even land, which is why they don't hurt him as badly. He's just gotten a lot more comfortable as a striker. He has traded off the sort of fragility for becoming more and more of an insane brawler, though. So maybe that's sort of, at a certain point, that equals out. And his chances of having a guy like Nicolau with just a perfect, precise, single counterpunch sleeping him start to creep back above zero. But yeah, I think it is. It's Nicolau's his aggression and his well-roundedness as well. Like, he's willing to pressure to make his counters happen, to create opportunities. But if Matt Schnell decides to go apeshit and pressure him, Nicolau is also perfectly capable of mixing up his counters, including takedowns. He will hit a clean double leg on somebody who's walking him down, and give the opponent more to think about. And Schnell, dangerous guard player, but a guard player. I don't think that's ever really worked against Nicolau. That anyone has ever successfully submitted him or beaten him from their back. So you got to pick him.
But yeah, should be tremendous. I mean, Sumidaji Schnell was one of the best fights of the year.
Yeah.
One of the best rounds I think I've ever seen.
Absolutely. Matt Schnell has effectively turned himself from glass cannon into legendary comeback artist. Which is, it's a step above glass cannon. But also not a style that I think you can expect to lead to a lot of high-level victories. All right. I think that'll do it. I'm running out of energy here, even though there are a couple more interesting fights to discuss. Thank you all so much for listening today. Thank you for bearing with me in my illness. I am definitely on the road to recovery, so I have no doubt that when Kyle comes on next week, I will be fit as a fiddle, and we will have some really, really good fights to discuss on that episode. I want to thank Phil for carrying more of the burden of leading the discussion, because I'm sick and have had several coughing fits that have caused me to pause the show and walk away from the computer. So, thanks everybody. If you want to hear more of the Thompson versus Holland undercard fights from the prelims that weren't on this main episode, you can find those in a bonus episode on our Patreon. It's just $3. Come on. I have medical bills, people, support the Patreon. And otherwise, that's basically it. Twitter, @BoxingBush. That's me. @EvilGregJackson. That's Phil. The Patreon, I already said that. We'll talk to you next week for the recap of Gonzalez Estrada 3 and the preview of UFC 282, now main evented by Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev. All of that next week, and until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.